once the pride of the Canadian Coast Guard on the mighty Lake Winnipeg, deemed redundant by the Crown, only to become a Lake Winnipeg research vessel, still serving that role over 2 decades later. This is the story of the old but mighty ship, MV Namao. Hey guys, Warship Guy 2005 here, and this is the second episode of Manitoba Riverboats / Lake Vessels. And this is the MV Namao. Early design and figures. The Namao story began all the way back in 1975. The MV Namao, often simply called the Namao, was designed as a Class 900 buoy tender and research vessel. She was constructed in Riverton, Manitoba. She is a small ship, weighing in at only 328 gross tons and a net tonnage of just 104. She is 33.62 meters from bow to stern, a beam of 8.53 meters, and a draft of just 2.13 meters. The Namao is powered by two 625 horsepower engines, powering twin screw propellers. It has a fuel capacity of 34.5 tons. She's one of the largest vessels ever to sail the lakes of Manitoba, only behind a few, like the now scrapped Thomas Lord Selkirk II, linked to the video in the description that I made of her. The Namao is crewed by just 9, 1 captain, a chief officer, a chief engineer, a second engineer, 4 deckhands, and lastly, and most importantly, the cook. However, 15 can comfortably fit aboard her. Career with the Canadian Coast Guard. Put to work on Lake Winnipeg in 1975 by the Coast Guard, who made her home port of Selkirk, Manitoba, the Namao's main assignment was to deploy, retrieve, and tend to navigational buoys. On Lake Winnipeg, from time to time, she would assist vessels in distress, mainly fishing boats and pleasure craft. During this time, she wore the unmistakable orange with an orange stripe of other, larger Canadian Coast Guard vessels, far different from the blue she wears today. She was alone, with no other Coast Guard vessels on the lake. The Namao was a lone wolf but did her job well, serving her main role until 1994, when along with buoy tending, the Namao, from 1994 to 1996, did a geological survey on the history of Lake Winnipeg, foreshadowing what was to come in only a few short years. The end of her Coast Guard career. In 1997, she was decommissioned and put up for sale by Crown Assets, which considered Namao, which was 22 at the time, and unable to leave the lake and a few nearby rivers like the Mighty Red, and it was almost certain that her fate was scrapping. Lake Winnipeg Research Consortium. However, luckily for the Namao, she was given a new lease on life when the Lake Winnipeg Research Consortium, or LWRC, just so happened to be needing a ship. The Namao, which was a buoy tender and a research vessel, fit the bill perfectly. So it was arranged, and in 1999, the Namao was to start her new life as a civilian research vessel. However, she was still fully owned by the Coast Guard. In August 1999, Canadian Coast Guard agreed to operate the Namao on the behalf of the LWRC on a cost recovery basis, and completed a complete research survey of Lake Winnipeg. From her launching in 1975, the Namao was home ported at Selkirk. However, this wasn't to last, as in September 1999, Canadian Coast Guard informed the LWRC that Namao was no longer welcome in Selkirk. As a replacement, the Canadian Coast Guard ship Vakta would require the dock. However, it wasn't delivered from Ontario, where she was built, until 2003, which was finally built and commissioned. So, from 1996 to 2003, there wasn't a Coast Guard ship on the lake, unless Namao happened to have a crew ready. Other than that, there was nothing. And in 2017, Vakta was moved to be home ported in Winnipeg. In Gimli instead of Selkirk, Getting back to Namao, Namao was welcomed with open arms by the town of Gimli, Manitoba, and she's now the largest ship in Gimli's harbor. MV Namao, 2000 to present. In 2001, the LWRC was granted funding by the Canada/Manitoba Economic Development Partnership Agreement, as Transport Canada had given maintenance requirements to the Namao. However, the Namao was still owned by the Coast Guard, but operated by the LWRC. But this wasn't to last. In 2005, the Namao's ownership was transferred to the LWRC by the Coast Guard. It was the end of this Canadian Coast Guard ship Namao, and the beginning of the motor vessel Namao, who was now solely owned and operated by the LWRC for the very first time. That was the first and only vessel. But, well, until 2016 when the MV Fuji, I'm just going to put the name on screen, came out of refit after the consortium acquired it in 2003, when she was donated. But she'll get her own video, hopefully within a month or two. Every year, the Namao completes 3 whole lake research surveys, in which the previously named, however you say that, name on screen, fills in for Namao in water that's just too shallow for the Namao to fit. In the spring, summer, and fall, it happens all year except, of course, in the spring, summer, and fall. And then in the winter, she sits idle in the harbor at Gimli because the ice is just too dangerous for any non-icebreakers, which no ship on Lake Winnipeg is an icebreaker. When Namao is underway, you can use the Lake Winnipeg Research website to track the Namao, which I didn't know before writing this, or I'd probably have done it by now. Her journey almost ended when the Selkirk dry dock closed, as the Namao is dry docked every 5 years for inspections and repairs. No other facility was large enough to handle the Namao until 2018, when the dry docking facilities in Hinasa were modified to handle the Namao. She can now be inspected and repaired properly. So, in conclusion, she's one of my favorite ships, even though she's little, but she's mighty, just like my favorite ship, HMCS Haida. The Namao has shown no signs of slowing down anytime soon. And with the current history of Namao has concluded until her eventual retirement in the future. And hopefully, she ends up as a museum ship. But only the future can see the future.